I was gingerly lifting the tweezers to the rare 1,932nd stamp when I heard the familiar sound of car doors in the yard. I glanced at my watch and saw it was 7:30. Daniel had arrived at exactly the right time with his new family for their weekly dinner. I carefully placed the stamp in the album and closed the magnifying glass I'd used for over 20 years to study philatelic finds. Voices came from the porch. Emma's high, childish laughter interrupted by her son's low baritone and Christina's ringing voice. They were arguing about something, but I couldn't make out the words. I rose from the chair, stretched, and headed for the front door, adjusting my shirt collar as I went. At 73, I still cared about my appearance, especially when I was expecting guests. Stamp collecting had become my hobby since retiring 5 years ago. Before that, I worked as a geologist, conducting expeditions all over the country, studying rocks and mapping deposits. My hands were used to precision work and my eyes were used to looking at fine details. Stamps proved to be the perfect activity for this mindset. Over the years, I'd amassed quite a collection, including rare wartime specimens and first issues of airmail. Daniel was the first to enter, slouching slightly as always and avoiding a direct gaze. My son had never been very decisive, even as a boy, preferring to sit on the sidelines when the other boys got into fights or invented dangerous games. Now, in his 45, he looked tired and sullen. The dark circles under his eyes spoke of sleep deprivation, and his slumped shoulders spoke of constant stress. "Hi, Daddy," he muttered, awkwardly hugging me with one arm and holding a bottle of cheap wine in the other. Behind him, Christina entered the house, leading 7-year-old Emma by the hand. My daughter-in-law looked as flawless as ever, perfectly styled blonde hair, an expensive blouse that clearly cost more than my son could afford on a software engineer's salary. She was 32 years old, but she skillfully hid her age under a layer of makeup and thanks to regular trips to the gym. She wore a thin gold necklace around her neck and a Swiss watch on her wrist that I'd once seen in a jewelry store window with a price tag of several $1,000s. "Good evening, Paul," she said, kissing my cheek and leaving a light scent of expensive French perfume. "How are you doing? Not too tired of being alone, I hope?" In her tone, I caught the familiar notes of false concern that she always used when she wanted to show others her role as a caring daughter-in-law. Christine had married my son only 2 years ago, but in that time I'd gotten to know her mannerisms well enough to distinguish sincerity from acting. She'd been an actress in the past, playing minor roles in the local theater until she realized she wasn't going to have a big career. "Everything is fine. Thank you for your concern," I replied politely and squatted down in front of Emma. "And how is my favorite granddaughter doing?" The little girl smiled a wide, toothless smile at me. Another baby tooth had recently fallen out. Emma was a surprisingly bright child for her 7 years, with big brown eyes and dark curly hair that she had inherited from her biological father. Christina never gave details about her first marriage, only mentioning that it didn't work out and that her ex-husband was not involved in raising their daughter. I suspected the story was much more complicated than that, but never pushed for details. "Grandpa, can I look at your stamps after dinner?" asked Emma, dimming her gaze and rubbing the edge of her pink dress. "Of course, little one. I have some new pieces you'll like." Christina frowned and put a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Emmy, you don't have to bother Grandpa with your requests. He's getting tired of our company as it is." "Oh no, he doesn't bother me at all," I hastened to assure her, but Christina was already taking the girl toward the living room. We made our way to the kitchen, where I had already set the table for the 4 of us. A simple white tablecloth that my late wife Grace had picked out, old china plates from her mother, and silverware, tarnished by time but still functional. I made baked chicken and vegetables, a dish I could cook quite well and which everyone in the room enjoyed. I hadn't learned to cook until after Grace died 3 years ago. Before that, she had been in charge of the kitchen, and I had only occasionally fried eggs or heated up leftovers. The first few months of being alone were difficult. I ate mostly convenience foods and ordered takeout. Then I realized that this was not an option and started to master simple recipes. Chicken and vegetables became my specialty, and it worked almost every time. Daniel sat in his usual seat to my right, Christina settled in across from me, and Emma took the chair next to me on my left. We started eating, and the first few minutes passed in relative silence, broken only by the tinkling of cutlery and quiet requests to pass the salt or pepper. "How are things at work, son?" I asked, trying to make conversation. "Fine, Dad. The project's almost finished, should be delivered to the customer in a couple weeks." And still no promotion? Interjected Christina with a faint chuckle. Daniel's been in the same position for 3 years. Maybe we should look for something more promising. My son blushed and focused on cutting up the chicken, clearly unwilling to pursue the subject further. I could see his jaw clench when Christina touched on his career failures. She'd hinted to me more than once during their 2 years of marriage that Daniel could have done better if he'd shown more ambition. It was as if she didn't realize that not everyone is cut out for the career race. A job is a job, I said softly. The important thing is that it's stable and allows you to support your family. Of course, Christina agreed, but I caught a note of disappointment in her voice. Although there's not much stability these days, prices go up and wages stay the same. We have to save money on everything. Emma lifted her head from her plate and looked at her stepmother, then at her father, then at me. In her eyes, I saw an understanding that shouldn't have been present in a 7-year-old. She understood the hints and subtexts of adult conversations all too well. It bothered me. Children should stay children for as long as possible. And Grandpa, don't you live alone in such a big house? Continued Christina, chopping vegetables with careful movements. Maybe we should think about moving to a smaller apartment. It would be more practical and economical. I set my fork aside and looked at my sister-in-law carefully. This was the house my wife had bought 40 years ago. This was where Daniel grew up, where we celebrated birthdays and New Year's Eve. Every room held memories of Grace, and the thought of moving felt like a betrayal of her memory. Her dressing table and mirror still stood in the bedroom. Her dresses hung in the closet that I couldn't bring myself to throw away. Handling the house on my own for now, I replied calmly, and there's plenty of room for everyone. Of course, Christina agreed hastily. I was just thinking of your convenience. The stairs, the large lot, the old gas stove, all require constant attention. I noticed her mention the gas stove in passing. Indeed, the stove was old back in the 60s, but it worked well. Christine had suggested more than once that we replace it with a modern electric one, citing safety. But I was used to gas, knew how to adjust the flame, and saw no need for a change. Mom, can I have some more chicken? Interrupted Emma, holding out her plate. Christina frowned for a moment at her daughter interrupting an important conversation, but quickly pulled herself together and smiled. Of course, dear, but only a small bite. The rest of dinner passed in a lighter atmosphere. We discussed the weather, Emma's weekend plans, and neighborhood news. Christina talked about her yoga classes and her plans to enroll in a floristry class. Daniel nodded silently and occasionally inserted brief comments. Emma listened attentively to the adult conversations, occasionally asking unexpectedly intelligent questions. Christine didn't return to the topic of moving, but I noticed her gaze occasionally sliding into the kitchen, studying the details of the interior and the condition of the appliances. She examined the gas burners, the old refrigerator, the cracked tiles on the wall. It was as if she were making a mental inventory of what needed to be replaced or repaired. The morning was clear and warm, perfect for working in the garden. I woke up at 7:30 as usual, without waiting for the alarm clock, a habit developed over decades of expedition life. After a breakfast of oatmeal and coffee, I went out into the yard with pruning shears and gardening gloves. The rose bushes against the south wall of the house needed pruning, and the bed of asters needed weeding. The garden had been Grace's pride in her lifetime, and I tried to keep it in a condition that would please her. Of course, I didn't have her flair for plants or innate understanding of what should grow where, but in 3 years I learned the basics of caring for flowers and shrubs. Working outdoors was soothing and helped me not think about loneliness. I was pruning withered rose branches when I heard the sound of a car pulling up. I glanced at my watch and saw it was 11:30, quite early for a visit. Christina's white sedan appeared from behind a lilac bush. She got out of the car alone, without Daniel or Emma, which was unusual. They usually came as a family on weekends or evenings. Good morning, Paul, she said hello, approaching the flower bed where I was working. What a beautiful day for gardening. Christina was dressed in a tracksuit and sneakers, her hair pulled back into a ponytail. There was a minimum of makeup on her face, making her look younger and more natural. But there was some tension in her eyes which she tried to hide behind a duty smile. Welcome, I replied, taking off my gloves. Where are the others? Daniel's at work and Emma's at a friend's birthday party. I thought I'd pay you a visit while I'm free. That explanation struck me as odd. Christina never came just for fun, without an excuse or family to accompany her. In the 2 years I'd known her, I couldn't remember a single occasion when she'd shown a spontaneous desire to be in my company. That's very nice of you. Would you like some coffee? I'd love some if it's not too much trouble. We walked into the house through the back door that led directly into the kitchen. I set the coffee maker down and Christina took a seat at the table, but soon stood up and began to slowly saunter around the room. Her gaze slid down the walls, stopping at the gas stove, the refrigerator, the windows. You have a very cozy kitchen, she said, running her hand along the countertop. Vintage. There must be a lot of memories associated with this place. Yeah, Grace loved to cook here. Spent half the day in the kitchen. Christina walked over to the stove and scrutinized the burners. Then she leaned over and peered into the oven as if studying its construction. And the stove is quite old. Aren't you afraid it might fail? Gas is a serious thing after all. So far it's working fine. I call the master every year for preventive maintenance. Of course. But modern models are much safer. They have an automatic gas shutoff if the flame goes out. She opened the door under the stove where the gas faucet was located and took a closer look at the connections. Her behavior was becoming increasingly strange, as if she were conducting some kind of inspection. Christina, are you looking for something in particular? Oh no, sorry, she laughed a little strained. Just wondering. We have an electric stove at home, and I'm not very familiar with gas stoves. The coffee was ready and I poured it into cups. We sat down at the table, but Christina kept looking around. A gas water heater in the corner of the kitchen, an old refrigerator with a loud compressor, and a ceiling vent caught her attention. Do you have good ventilation? She asked, looking up. Basically, yes. The sash sticks sometimes, but overall it works. I see. And if God forbid something happens to the gas, how quickly can you shut off the supply? This question finally alerted me. Why was the daughter-in-law so interested in gas equipment? An unpleasant thought flashed through my mind, but I tried to push it away. The main tap is in the yard, near the meter. And there's an intermediate one here, under the stove. Christina nodded and took a sip of coffee, but I noticed she was memorizing every word I said. At that moment, a child's voice came from the yard. Someone was calling her name. Mommy! Mommy, where are you? It's Emma, Christina said, getting up from the table. Apparently, the party ended earlier than planned. She went out the back door, and I stayed in the kitchen, pondering her strange behavior. Through the window, I saw her talking to her daughter outside the car. Emma was wearing a smart blue dress and holding a balloon. The girl was talking excitedly, waving her free hand, and Christine listened, nodding occasionally. Then they both headed toward the house. Emma ran into the kitchen first, smiling happily. Grandpa Paul! And I was at a birthday party. There was a cake with princesses on it. How interesting. Tell me more about it. While Emma passionately described the party, her friends and the presents, Christina stood in the doorway and looked around the kitchen again. This time her gaze lingered on the window above the sink. It overlooked the garden and was usually left ajar for ventilation. Can I see your stamps? Asked Emma, having finished her story about the holiday. Sure, let's go into the living room. We moved into the next room, where my desk with albums and folders stood by the window. Christina followed us but showed no interest in the philatelic collection. Instead, she studied the layout of the rooms, the arrangement of doors, windows. Emma excitedly looked at the stamps with pictures of animals and landmarks from different countries. I told her the history of each piece, explaining how they came to be in my collection. The girl listened attentively and asked intelligent questions. Meanwhile, Christina walked through the living room, looked into the dining room, went up the stairs to the second floor. I could hear her footsteps upstairs. She was looking around the bedrooms and bathroom. This behavior was completely out of character with a normal, friendly visit. Grandpa, is this stamp expensive? Asked Emma, pointing to a 1954th year copy. Quite rare. They were issued in a limited edition. And did you buy all the stamps yourself? Some I bought, some I swapped with other collectors, and these, I pointed to a few foreign specimens, I brought back from expeditions when I was still working. Christina came down the stairs and approached us. She had the expression on her face of someone who had gotten all the information she needed. Emmy, we should get home. Daddy will be home from work soon, and I need to make dinner. Mommy, can I watch a little more? No, honey, we've been bothering Grandpa Paul long enough. There was an unaccustomed firmness in Christina's voice. Emma became frustrated, but obediently closed the stamp album. "Thanks for showing me," she told me quietly. "Come again. I'll be sure to show you new specimens." We walked them to the car. Christina was unusually silent, as if she was thinking about something important. Emma waved to me from the window as they drove away. I was alone in the yard, holding my forgotten gardening gloves. My sister-in-law's visit left a strange aftertaste. Her demeanor, her questions about the gas equipment, her thorough inspection of the house, all seemed suspicious. Back in the house, I walked through the places Christine had been, trying to figure out what exactly she was interested in. The kitchen looked as normal, but I noticed that the door under the stove was ajar, so she must have looked in there again, while Emma and I were looking at stamps. I closed the door and wondered. Maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But my intuition, developed from years of working in the field, told me that something was wrong with this visit. After the guests left, I went back to work in the garden, but my concentration was broken. Thoughts of Christine's strange behavior kept me busy, and I trimmed the branches, thinking about her questions about the gas stove. The sun was high, and I had decided to take a break when I heard the familiar sound of a car again. Christina returned an hour and a half after leaving. She got out of the car with Emma, but this time her sister-in-law had a concerned look on her face. The girl was carrying a bag from the toy store. Apparently, her mother had bought her something after a friend's birthday party. "We're bothering you again," Christina said as she approached the wicket. "Emma forgot a balloon at your place. She's very upset." Indeed, on the kitchen table lay a red heart-shaped balloon that the girl had brought from the party. A small thing, but apparently important to the child. "Sure, come on in. It's left in the kitchen." We entered the house and I handed Emma her balloon. The little girl clutched it tightly to her and smiled. "Thank you, Grandpa Paul. This is my prettiest balloon." Christina stood in the hallway, holding her cell phone in her hand and occasionally glancing at the screen. She seemed to be waiting for an important call. Her fingers drummed nervously on the casing of the device. "Emmy, why don't you go play in the yard while Grandpa and I talk?" she suggested to her daughter. "Can I look at more stamps?" "No, honey, it's such nice weather outside. Play with the balloon in the garden." Emma obediently went out into the yard, and Christina and I stayed in the kitchen. My sister-in-law sat down at the table, but she looked worried. She glanced at her phone every now and then, as if waiting for an important message. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "You look worried." "Yeah, just a lot of things piling up. You know how it is. Family, work, household chores." Christina was working part-time at a beauty salon, doing manicures and pedicures. The work was not too strenuous, but she often complained of fatigue and lack of time. At that moment, the phone rang. Christina flinched and quickly looked at the screen. Her face changed. There was an expression of tense readiness. "Excuse me, this is an important call. Can I take it in the other room?" "Of course, come into the living room." Christina hastily stood up and headed for the door, but then stopped. No, I'd rather go upstairs if you don't mind. It'll be quieter up there." She climbed the stairs to the second floor, and I heard her go into the far bedroom and close the door behind her. Her voice came through the ceiling, but it was impossible to make out the words. Her tone was businesslike and reserved, as if she were discussing something important. I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the window, watching Emma in the yard. The girl was playing with a balloon near a bed of roses, tossing it up and catching it. Sometimes she stopped and listened to her mother's voice coming from the upstairs window. The conversation upstairs lingered on. Christine had been talking for about 10 minutes, and her voice was growing quieter and quieter, as if she were discussing something secret. There were short pauses, as if she were listening intently. Emma, meanwhile, came closer to the house and stood under the bedroom window where her stepmother was talking. The girl held the balloon to her chest and froze, clearly listening to the words I couldn't hear from here. After a few minutes, the expression on Emma's face changed. Carelessness was replaced with anxiety, her eyes wide. She took a step back from the house, then another. The balloon slipped out of her hands and slowly rose into the air, but the girl didn't even notice. I opened the kitchen window and called out quietly, "Emma, is everything okay?" She turned to me and I saw fear in her eyes. Not childish fright at a fallen toy or a broken cup, but real adult terror at what she was hearing. "Grandpa," she whispered, running to the window. "Grandpa, can I come in?" "Sure, come on in." Emma ran into the kitchen through the back door. Her little hands were shaking and her face was pale. She walked over to me and tugged at the sleeve of my shirt. Grandpa, will you be home tonight? A strange question for a 7-year-old. Children don't usually inquire about adults' plans for such details. Yes, of course. What's wrong, baby girl? Emma looked up at the ceiling, from where her mother's muffled voice still came from, then back at me. Grandpa, she said very seriously, looking me straight in the eye. Beware. Her words sounded so unusual that I squatted down to be on her level. What do I have to watch out for, Emma? The girl paused, as if searching for the right words. Her childish face expressed a seriousness that was completely out of keeping with her age. Don't go into the house tonight, she said quietly, but very clearly. A frost ran down my back. Emma wasn't speaking in a childish way. There was real adult concern in her voice. Emma, what did you hear upstairs? Mommy was talking to someone on the phone. The girl looked back at the door leading to the hallway. She said about the gas and about tonight, and also about making it look like an accident. My heart beat faster. A child couldn't make these things up. Those words clearly belonged to an adult planning something serious. What else did she say? Didn't understand everything, but she did say to check if you'd be home and that everything should be ready by 8 o'clock tonight. At that moment, it was quiet upstairs. The conversation ended, and I heard Christina's footsteps down the hall. She was coming down the stairs. Emma, I whispered quickly, this stays between us. Agreed? The girl nodded, and in her eyes I saw an understanding of the seriousness of the situation. She was a smart kid and sensed that something wrong was going on. Christina walked into the kitchen with a smile on her face, but I noticed the tension in her posture. She clutched her phone tightly in her hand. Sorry for the long conversation. Work stuff. Had to discuss tomorrow's schedule. That's okay. And Emma was upset because the balloon flew away. It's okay, we'll get a new one. Christina looked at her daughter carefully. Emmy, are you sad about something? Just tired, the girl answered quietly. Then we should definitely go home. You get some rest before dinner. Christina took her daughter's hand and headed for the exit. At the door, she turned around. Paul, will you be home tonight? The same question Emma had asked a few minutes ago. The coincidence struck me as too suspicious. Yeah, I plan on staying home. Good. Maybe we'll stop by again later if you don't mind. Sure, you're always welcome. They left, and I was left standing in the doorway, seeing them off with a look. Emma turned around at the last moment and looked at me as seriously as only children can when faced with something beyond their comprehension. The car door slammed shut, and the white sedan disappeared around the corner. I closed the front door and leaned back against it, thinking about what had happened. A 7-year-old girl's warning might have seemed like a child's fantasy, but something in her voice, in the seriousness of her gaze, made me take her words seriously. Gas. Evening. Accident. Those words swirled around in my head, forming a frightening picture. After Christina left with Emma, I was alone in the hallway, still feeling strangely unsettled by the conversation that had taken place. The 7-year-old girl's warning was running through my head, and I couldn't decide how to feel about it. On the one hand, children often exaggerate what they hear, make up details, and misunderstand adult conversations. On the other hand, there was something so serious and adult in Emma's voice that made me take her words seriously. I made my way into the living room and sat down in my favorite chair by the window. From here I could see the whole yard, the gate, and part of the street. The familiar surroundings should have been soothing, but the anxiety wouldn't go away. Emma's words echoed over and over in her mind. Beware, don't go inside today. It was strange to hear such phrases from a child. Usually children spoke more simply, more directly. Grandpa, Mommy is planning something bad, or Mommy wants to do something bad, would sound like a child's retelling of an overheard conversation. But Emma used precise adult wording, as if she were repeating the words she'd heard. I got up and walked into the kitchen, checking the gas stove. All the burners were off, the taps closed. Nothing suspicious. But the memories of Christina studying the gas equipment in the morning came back with renewed vigor. Her questions about ventilation, her interest in the location of the taps, her close inspection of the connections. It all took on an ominous meaning. I opened the door under the stove and looked at the gas pipes. Nothing unusual. All the connections looked normal. But what if I'm missing something? What if Christine really is planning something gas-related? The thought seemed so absurd that I even laughed out loud. My sister-in-law, for all her faults, is not a murderer. Perhaps she is calculating and selfish. Perhaps she dreams of an inheritance. But to plan a murder? That was beyond the bounds of reason. And yet Emma's warning was jarring. The girl was intelligent and observant. If she sensed danger in her mother's conversation, then there was indeed something disturbing there. I went back to the living room and tried to get busy with the stamps, but there was no concentration. The tweezers trembled in my hands and my thoughts kept returning to Christina's morning visit. Her behavior was strange indeed. Usually she held herself confident and at ease, but today there was a sense of nervousness and underlying tension. And the phone call? Christina had been expecting it. That much was obvious. She was nervous while the phone was silent and immediately perked up when it rang. Normal work matters didn't elicit such a reaction. Something important, secret was being discussed in that conversation. I closed the stamp album and stood up. I had a decision to make. Either believe the 7-year-old and take his warning seriously, or consider it all a childish fantasy and go on with my life as usual. Intuition, developed over decades of geological work, suggested the former. On expeditions, one had to rely on premonitions to catch the subtle signs of danger. A rock fall, a landslide, a sudden change of weather, all this can be predicted if you carefully observe and trust your feelings. Right now, those senses were saying that Emma was right. Something was brewing for tonight, something to do with the gas and my presence at home. I glanced at the clock, 4:30. According to Emma, everything should be ready by 8 o'clock tonight. So I still had time to think about the situation and make a decision. Assuming Christina is really planning something, what is it? A gas accident that's supposed to look accidental. Leak, poisoning, explosion. There were several possibilities. They all involved me being home at a certain time. But why would Christina get rid of me? An inheritance? The house? We'd never discussed the will in detail, but she knew for sure that Daniel was the primary heir. Upon my death, the house would go to my son, and therefore effectively to his family. Yes, that could have been a motive. Christine had hinted more than once at the inconvenience of living in a rented apartment, talking about her dream of owning her own home. And I, a healthy 73-year-old man, had many more years to live. Too many for her plans. The thought that my sister-in-law might be planning my death evoked a mixture of horror and disbelief. It happens in movies, in detective novels, but not in regular life. Not with people you know personally, people you have dinner with every week. And yet the logic was ironclad. Motive, inheritance, opportunity, access to the house, and knowledge of the gas system. Alibi, she could be far away from the scene when the accident happened. I paced the room, mulling over the details. If my hunch was correct, someone should show up at or near the house tonight. Probably the man Christina had spoken to on the phone. A gas fitter, an emergency locksmith, someone who could make the leak look like an accident. But why today? What's so special about this day? I tried to remember if I'd said anything to Christina about my plans for tonight. No, just a normal Thursday, no special events. Maybe the thing was that Daniel would be at work and Emma would be at home or at a friend's house. Christina would have an alibi, being elsewhere when tragedy struck. A perfect plan, if it weren't for the accident of an overhearing child. I looked at the clock again. Time was running out and a decision had to be made. Stay home and risk testing my suspicions, or go somewhere else for the evening, heeding Emma's warning. The second option seemed more sensible. If I was wrong, I could just spend the evening out without disturbing anyone. If I was right, I could save my life. But where to go? Who do I go to with such an incredible story? Telling someone about my sister-in-law's suspicions without proof would be ridiculous. People would think I was paranoid or senile. I needed someone who knew me well enough to believe the seriousness of the situation. Someone experienced, practical, capable of giving sound advice. I thought of Harris McConnell, my old friend and neighbor at my former place of residence. We met 20 years ago when he worked for the fire department. Harris had seen all sorts of things in his job, including cases of domestic gas poisoning. If anyone would understand my concerns, it would be him. Besides, Harris had a practical mind. He wouldn't waste time with doubts, but would come up with a plan of action. and his experience in dealing with emergencies would come in handy if my suspicions were well-founded. I've made a decision. The decision to contact Harris gave me some peace of mind. But before calling my old friend, I wanted to re-examine all the oddities in Christine's behavior over the past few months. Perhaps I had missed something, had overlooked some small detail that could now add up to a bigger picture. I sat down at my desk and picked up the notebook I usually use for writing about stamps. At the top, I wrote today's date and began to recall all the suspicious episodes involving my sister-in-law. The habit of systematizing information remained from geological times. Then the results of the expedition and the safety of people depended on the accuracy of the records. The first thing that came to mind was the conversation about the will a month ago. Christina had come to my house alone, without her family, ostensibly to check up on me. We were sitting in the same kitchen, drinking tea, and she very carefully turned the conversation to the topic of inheritance. She started from afar, with general musings about the importance of planning for the future. "Paul, have you made a will?" she asked then, stirring the sugar in her cup and not looking me in the eye. "Yes, of course I did. Back when Grace was still alive, we drew up all the paperwork." "It's been a while since you updated?" "I mean, life changes. New circumstances arise." At the time, I thought she was asking for practical reasons, a young woman thinking about her family's future. But now this conversation took on a different meaning. Christina was asking if the will was up to date, if I was planning to change it. "No, the document is drawn up correctly. Daniel is listed as the primary heir, as the only son. And the house. It's the most valuable part of the inheritance, isn't it? Naturally, the house will go to Daniel as well." Christina nodded then, with a satisfied look, as if she had gotten the information she needed. She didn't return to the subject again, but I noticed a change in her demeanor after that conversation. She became more interested in my well-being, asking questions about my daily regimen and habits. The second episode happened 3 weeks ago, when the whole family came for Sunday dinner. Christina then got very insistent about the gas stove. "Paul, this stove is ancient," she said, inspecting the burners after the meal. "When was it bought?" "In '67. Grace picked it out." "Almost 60 years old. I mean, it's dangerous. Modern models are much safer, with automatic shutoffs." Daniel then backed his wife up. "Dad, maybe we really should change it. We can help you buy a new one." But I declined. The stove was working properly, and it seemed wasteful to replace it just for fashion reasons. Besides, it was linked to memories of Grace, the stove my wife used to cook all our family dinners. Christine didn't insist at the time, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes. Now I understood why. A new stove would spoil her plans. Modern models are indeed safer. It's harder to fake an accidental gas leak with them. The third point was the constant questions about my daily routine. Christina regularly asked me what time I got up, when I went to bed, whether I was at home in the evenings. She explained this as concern for my health, saying that it is important for elderly people to keep to a schedule. But the questions were too detailed for simple interest. "What do you usually do in the evening?" she asked. "Various things. I read, watch TV, work with stamps." "Don't you go out for walks? Fresh air is good for you." "Sometimes I go out in the yard, but not far. It's awkward in the dark." Christina memorized every answer. Now I understood why. She was studying my habits, choosing the right time for her plan. The fourth episode was the persistent suggestions to install an additional alarm system. A month ago, Christina brought an advertising brochure of a security firm. "Look how modern the system is. Sensors on windows, doors, even smoke detectors. A simple lock is enough for me. Our neighborhood is quiet, robberies are rare. But smoke detectors are for safety. If something happens at night, the signal goes straight to the emergency services." At the time, I didn't understand why she was so insistent on fire detectors. Now the logic was clear. The sensors would have prevented the gas plan from happening. They would have triggered a leak or fire, attracting the attention of neighbors or security. The fifth point concerned my keys. A week ago, Christina asked if anyone had spare keys to the house. "What if something happens and we can't get in?" She explained her interest. "Daniel has a set. There's another one lying in a hiding place in the backyard." "Where exactly? Shouldn't we find a place closer to the entrance?" I showed her the rock near the porch under which I'd hidden the spare key. Christina memorized the spot carefully and even checked to see if the key was easy to get to. For safety, as she explained. Now all this talk was adding up to an ominous picture. Christina methodically gathered information about the will, about the routine, about the security system, about access to the house. It was as if she were preparing for an operation, thinking through every detail. And there was one more thing that had seemed insignificant at the time. 2 weeks ago, she asked if I was taking sleeping pills or other medications. Just taking care of your health. At your age, it's important to watch your blood pressure, your heart. So far, I've gone without medication. Just vitamins sometimes. What about insomnia? Have you tried any natural remedies? I sleep fine, no problems. Christina obviously wanted to know how well I slept, if I was in the habit of taking sleeping pills. The information would be useful if planning something for the night hours. After writing down all the suspicious episodes, I set the notebook aside and thought. The picture I was getting was compelling, but still based on circumstantial evidence. Any lawyer would call it speculation, not evidence. But circumstantial evidence was enough for me. My intuition, honed by years of fieldwork, rarely failed me. In the mountains or the taiga, the price of error was too high to ignore a hunch. Now the stakes were no less. My own life. I glanced at my watch 5:15. There was less and less time to think. If Christine was really planning something for tonight, then I had to act. The decision was ripe. I'm not staying home tonight. Trusting 7-year-old Emma and her own intuition seemed more sensible than risking her life to test a theory. Now I had to contact Harris and ask for help. The old fireman would understand the gravity of the situation and tell her how to proceed. Harris McConnell lived 20 minutes from my house, in a modest one-story cottage on a quiet North Miami street. We'd met 20 years ago when he was still in the fire department, and I'd just moved to the neighborhood. Harris helped me deal with a malfunctioning chimney back then, and we've maintained a friendship ever since. After retiring 5 years ago, he moved to this house closer to the sea. He gardened, repaired old cars, and occasionally advised young firefighters. A man of practical mind, used to extreme situations and quick decisions. I arrived at his place about 5 o'clock in the evening. Harris was working in the garage under the hood of an old pickup truck, and the sound of my car made him look out. When he saw me, he wiped his hands on a rag and headed toward me. "Paul, what are you doing here? Did something happen?" Harris was 5 years older than me, but he looked younger. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a graying beard and shrewd blue eyes. 25 years in the fire department had taken its toll on his character. He had the ability to assess a situation quickly and act without hesitation. "We need to talk," I said seriously. "It's a delicate matter." "Sure, come on in. You want a beer? Or something stronger?" "Beer's fine." We walked into the house and Harris pulled 2 cans of beer out of the refrigerator. His wife had died 3 years ago, and he'd been living alone since then, like me. It created an extra bond between us. We understood each other without too many words. "Sit down, tell me about it," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "I can tell by the look on your face it's serious." I took a sip of beer and began the story. I spoke slowly, in detail, trying not to leave out important details. About Christina's strange behavior, about her questions about the gas stove, about this morning's visit, about the mysterious phone call and Emma's warning. Harris listened silently, nodding occasionally. His face remained impassive, but I could see him analyzing every word I said, the habit of a professional who was used to assessing danger by circumstantial signs. "Show me the notes," he asked when I was done. I handed him a notebook with a list of suspicious episodes. Harris read all the items carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Did the girl say exactly what she said about 8 o'clock at night?" "Yes, very clearly. Everything must be ready by 8 o'clock this evening." That's exactly how she relayed her mother's words. "Did she mention the gas too?" "Yes, and also about something that should look like an accident." Harris laid aside his notebook and rubbed his beard thoughtfully. In his years of service, he'd seen many cases of gas poisoning, both accidental and intentional. Knew how easy it was to fake a leak to make it look like a tragic accident. "Look, Paul," he said at last, "individually, all these facts can be explained in different ways, but together they add up to a bad picture. Do you believe me?" "I do. I've known you long enough to know you're not paranoid or sensationalist. If you say something's wrong, it's really wrong. Relief came over me in a wave. Finally found someone who didn't think my suspicions were a senile quirk. What to do next? I asked. There are several options. The first is to go to the police, but they're not likely to understand us there. Circumstantial evidence, the story of a 7-year-old child, that's not enough to make a case. What's the second option? Wait and see. You don't go home tonight, you stay here or somewhere else. If your suspicions are correct, someone will show up outside your house tonight. This plan seemed reasonable. We'd get proof without risking my life. And how do we watch the house? There's a place, Harris said, walking over to the window. Remember the vacant lot across the street from your lot? There's an old water tower there. It's got a great view and it's hard to spot us. I pictured that tower, an abandoned structure 20 feet high that had once supplied water to local homes. It was now unused, but the stairs were still in working order. It's dangerous to climb up there in the dark. You don't have to go up high. It's enough to climb a few meters to see your yard over the fence. Harris got up and walked to the bedroom, from where he returned with a small backpack, thermos of coffee, flashlight, binoculars, in case we wait a long time. What if no one shows up? Then we'll assume you were wrong, but it's better to be reassured and spend a restless night than risk your life. The logic was flawless. I finished my beer and stood up. When do we leave? We'll wait until dark. It's too bright now, we might be spotted. In the meantime, tell me again about the conversation with the girl. Every detail. I recounted my dialogue with Emma, trying to reproduce the exact words. Harris listened intently, occasionally interjecting. Smart girl, he said eventually, and brave. Not every child would dare to warn of such danger. Yes, Emma is special. It's a shame she's growing up in a family like that. What about the father? Is Daniel aware of his wife's plans? I doubt it. He's weak-willed, but not evil. Christine is most likely acting on her own or with the help of outsiders. Then he could also be considered a victim. After you die, he'll inherit the house, and after a while, something bad might happen to him too. The thought hadn't occurred to me, but now it seemed logical. If Christine is capable of planning to kill her father-in-law, what's to stop her from getting rid of her husband as well when he becomes the only obstacle to full ownership of the inheritance? So we're not only protecting me, but Daniel and Emma as well. Exactly, and the sooner we get Christina out in the open, the better for everyone. We spent the next hour discussing the details of the surveillance plan. Harris pulled out a map of the area and showed us the best point for an ambush. We decided to arrive at the tower around 8:30, when it would be dark but not too late for the appearance of intruders near my house. And if we see anything suspicious, I asked, we call the emergency services right away. A gas leak, suspicious people outside an elderly person's home is reason enough to call the police. What if it turns out to be a coincidence? Then we'll apologize and go our separate ways. But my gut tells me it's not a coincidence. It was slowly getting dark outside the window. March in Florida meant warm evenings and early twilight, the perfect time for covert operations. Dark enough to hide, but not so late as to attract the attention of the neighbors. Harris checked the contents of his backpack, making sure his flashlight was working and his binoculars were properly adjusted. His actions betrayed an experienced man used to emergencies. Ready? He asked at 7:30. Ready. We got into his old Jeep and drove toward my house. On the way, Harris explained the plan of action one more time, assigning duties. He would watch with binoculars. I would record the time and details of what was happening. If there were any suspicious persons, we'd call the police immediately. The main thing is not to be heroic, he warned. Our job is to record facts, not to apprehend criminals. The water tower stood in a vacant lot overgrown with tall grass and shrubs. We parked behind a small grove so the car wouldn't be visible from the road. It was about 300 meters from my house, close enough for observation, but far enough away from possible danger. We climbed up the water tower, climbing a rusty ladder to about 4 meters high. From here, we had an excellent view of my house and the surrounding area. Harris settled down with his binoculars, his back resting against the metal structure, and I sat next to him with my notebook and pen. The evening air was warm and humid, typical of a Florida March. Time passed slowly. It was 7:45 on the clock, and we kept a close eye on every movement in the neighborhood. My house looked peaceful and serene in the setting sun. The yellow light in the living room window suggested that someone might think I was home. I'd left the desk lamp on to give the appearance of presence. Quiet so far, Harris muttered, slowly waving the binoculars from side to side. Just an ordinary evening in a bedroom neighborhood. Indeed, the street lived its measured life. Neighbors were watering lawns, walking dogs, children playing on the playground at the end of the block. Nothing suspicious or unusual. I began to wonder if my suspicions were correct. What if we're wrong? I asked quietly. Maybe Christina was just discussing some domestic issues on the phone, and Emma misunderstood? We'll sit tight until 10, Harris replied, not taking his eyes off the binoculars. If nothing happens, we'll consider it a false alarm. At 8 p.m. exactly, a car appeared on my street, a dark blue sedan that drove slowly past the house and parked in the shade of large oak trees about 50 feet from the gate. A middle-aged man got out of the car, looked around the neighborhood, and pulled out his cell phone. First suspect, Harris reported, handing me the binoculars. Record the time. I jotted down in my notebook, 20000, dark blue sedan, license plate not visible. Male, mid-40s, medium height. The stranger talked on the phone for about 5 minutes, occasionally glancing at my house. Then he put the device in his pocket and got back into his car, but didn't leave. Apparently he was expecting someone or something. Clearly not a random passerby, Harris commented as I handed the binoculars back to him. The minutes stretched on like hours. The man in the sedan continued to wait, occasionally getting out of the car to stretch his legs. He acted like an observer monitoring the situation before some operation. At 20 minutes past 9, the sound of a heavy vehicle was heard. A white van with City Gas Service written on the side was driving slowly down the street. Even in the twilight, I could make out the official symbols and the emergency number. Now that's interesting, Harris muttered, pointing his binoculars at the approaching van. The van stopped right outside my gate. A man in a gas company uniform, a blue jumpsuit, a helmet, a tool bag over his shoulder came out of the cab. He looked like a regular locksmith called in to fix an accident. Take notes, Harris commanded. 2020, gas service van, number. He dictated the license plate. One employee, age about 35 to 40. The locksmith opened the gate and walked into the yard. He had a key. I'd seen him enter the house through the front door without difficulty, so he knew about the stash of spare keys I'd told Christina about last week. This isn't an emergency call, I said, watching the stranger's actions. Emergency services don't use tenants' keys. Agreed. The guy is clearly acting on a plan. The gas worker disappeared into the house for about 10 minutes. Then he went out into the yard and headed for the gas meter, which was located against the far wall of the building. From there, he could not be seen well, even with binoculars, because of the lilac bushes. Working on the gas system, Harris reported, doing something near the meter. The man in the blue sedan, meanwhile, got out of his car and walked closer to my house, obviously supervising the process. There was clearly a connection between him and the gas worker. They acted coherently, like a team. 2 accomplices, I jotted down in my notebook, one handling the gas, the other providing insurance. The locksmith spent about 15 minutes at the meter, then moved on to the outside of the house's gas system. I knew that's where the main pipe leading to the kitchen stove ran. That was where it was easiest to arrange the leak to make it look accidental. What's he doing there? I asked, straining my vision. Hard to see in the dark, but he's working with connections, unscrewing and screwing something. Harris tried to adjust the binoculars to a higher magnification, but the growing darkness made it hard to see details clearly. Only one thing was clear. The stranger was making some kind of manipulation of my house's gas system. The work continued for another 20 minutes. The locksmith acted methodically and professionally, obviously knowing what he was doing. At times he took tools out of his bag. At other times he simply adjusted something with his hands. Almost done, muttered Harris, watching the action through his binoculars. We'll check the result now. The gas worker took out a small device, apparently a gas analyzer, and held it up to where the pipes were joined. Stood like that for a few minutes, then put the device away and nodded toward the observer at the sedan. Done, I wrote down the time in my notebook. 21:05. Job complete. The locksmith gathered up his tools, walked back into the house, apparently to put the key back in its place, and returned to the van. The man at the sedan headed for his car as well. The operation was coming to an end. They'll be leaving now, Harris said, but the result of their work will remain. The gas service van was the first to pull away from the house and disappeared in the direction of downtown. A dark blue sedan followed at intervals of a few minutes. The street was quiet and peaceful again, as if nothing had happened. All clear, Harris said, lowering his binoculars. Professionally done. If we hadn't known ahead of time, we never would have thought there was a diversion here. I wrote down the departure times of both cars and closed the notebook. The evidence had been gathered, but what to do with it next? Now I see why Christina was interested in my daily routine, I said. She wanted to make sure I'd be home when their plan worked. And the plan is simple and effective, Harris replied. Leak gas during the night while you're sleeping. By morning, the concentration will reach dangerous levels. It'll look like a tragic accident with an elderly person who forgot to check the stove. But we've seen everything. We have descriptions, license plates, times. That's enough for the police. We'll go to the station now and tell everything to the officer on duty. And in the morning, the investigators will find evidence of tampering with the gas system. Harris began to descend from the tower, gingerly fumbling with his feet on the steps of the rusty ladder. I followed, still pondering what I'd seen. Christina's plan was well thought out, but there was one factor she hadn't considered: 7-year-old Emma, who happened to overhear the conversation and risked warning me. Good thing you believed the girl, I said as we reached the ground. Children often sense danger better than adults, Harris replied, putting the binoculars in his backpack. Their intuition hasn't dulled yet. We reached the Jeep and got into the cab. Harris started the engine but didn't move. Listen, Paul, he said seriously, what we saw is attempted murder. Christina and her accomplices may turn out to be dangerous people. Be careful. I nodded, realizing the gravity of the situation. The sister-in-law I thought was just a calculating and selfish woman had turned out to be capable of premeditated murder. That changed everything. Let's go to the police, I said firmly. We drove to the North Miami police station through the night streets, and I couldn't escape the thought that my 7-year-old granddaughter had saved my life. If it weren't for her warning, I would be sleeping at home right now, unaware that the gas was slowly filling the rooms. By morning, the concentration would have reached lethal levels, and the neighbors would have found my body, blaming the tragedy on age-related absent-mindedness. Tell you what, Harris said, suddenly pulling over to the curb. Let's call first responders. Have them document the gas leak, and then we'll go to the police with the evidence ready to go. The logic was impeccable. The technicians would find evidence of tampering with the gas system, which would be a strong argument in favor of our version of events. Harris pulled out his cell phone and dialed the emergency number. Hello, is this the emergency services? We have a suspected gas leak at an address. He dictated my home address. Yes, there is a possible poisoning hazard. The house is temporarily unoccupied, but the situation should be checked immediately. The dispatcher promised to send a crew within 15 minutes. We turned around and drove back to the water tower. It was better to wait for the emergency service near the scene. As we drove, I thought about Christine and her motives. The house was really worth a lot of money. Real estate in that area of Florida was highly valued. After I died, it would go to Daniel, and therefore, in effect, to her. But could her lust for profit have driven her to murder? Was she really that cold-blooded? What do you think? I asked Harris. Did she plan it alone, or was Daniel in on it too? I doubt the son is involved, he replied, parking in a familiar spot behind the grove. From what you tell me, he's weak-willed, but not evil. Christina most likely acted on her own. We got out of the car and settled into our previous observation post. My house stood dark and silent, but now I knew what danger lurked within. Somewhere in the gas system, a small leak was gaping, slowly filling the air with poisonous vapors. The emergency services arrived just in time. 2 cars with flashing lights and a team of specialists in hazmat suits. We watched them surround the house, set up equipment, take initial measurements. There's a leak, Harris reported, watching the action through binoculars. See how they're waving the detectors around? The instruments are clearly showing something. Indeed, the behavior of the specialists indicated that our suspicions were confirmed. They worked quickly and clearly, shut off the gas, ventilated the rooms, searched for the source of the leak. Half an hour later, a police car arrived at the house. Apparently, someone from the first responders had called law enforcement, detecting signs of intentional tampering. It's time to act, Harris said. Now we have both technical expertise and police on the scene. We descended the tower and approached the house. The senior emergency response shift supervisor, a man in his 50s wearing a hazmat suit, was explaining the situation to a police sergeant. Leak in the exterior of the system, he was saying, pointing to a spot against the wall of the house. The connection has been loosened on purpose, very carefully. It's not wear and tear or accidental failure. The police sergeant, a middle-aged Hispanic man with a tired face, was writing down the statement in a notebook. "Where's the owner of the house?" he asked. "There he is," I said, stepping closer. "Paul Gillens, this is my house." The sergeant looked me over with surprise. "Mr. Gillens, and we've been looking for you." Neighbors reported seeing lights in the windows, but no one answered the phone. "I wasn't home tonight." "Good thing you weren't." I showed the cop my notebook of surveillance footage and told the whole story from the beginning, from Christina's strange behavior to Emma's warning to the evening surveillance of the house. Harris corroborated what I said, adding technical details about what I'd seen. The sergeant listened to us carefully, interrogated some points, wrote down the license plates of the cars we'd seen outside the house. "Serious charges," he said eventually. "Attempted murder through gas poisoning. We'll have to make an official statement." The first responder, meanwhile, had finished inspecting the gas system. "Connection is loose 2 turns," he reported. "The leak is small but constant. Overnight, the gas concentration in the house would have reached dangerous levels, especially in the second-floor bedroom." "And if the man had been sleeping there?" the sergeant asked. "Severe poisoning, most likely fatal. The gas is heavier than air, accumulates in low places. The person just wouldn't wake up." I shuddered as I pictured the scene. Christine had thought of everything in detail. A quiet, unnoticed death that would look like an accident. No one would suspect murder. "What next?" I asked the sergeant. "First we go to the station, file a report, then the detectives will go over your statement. They'll run the license plates, find the owners." "Will they arrest Christina?" "So far, we only have circumstantial evidence in your suspicions. We need more hard evidence. Statements from accomplices, phone records, financial records." The sergeant was right. Legally, the case looked complicated. The defense could argue that the leak was accidental and the appearance of the gas service van was a routine inspection or repair. "And the girl? Can Emma testify about what she heard on the phone?" "The testimony of a 7-year-old doesn't have much legal standing," the sergeant explained, "but they could be an additional argument." We spent until 12:30 in the morning at the police station. We took a detailed statement, gave an extensive statement, provided all the evidence we had gathered. The detective on duty promised to start the investigation in the morning. "Where will you spend the night?" he asked me. "You can't go back to the house yet. The technical services have to fully air the premises and check the system." "I'll spend the night at Harris's," I decided, "and tomorrow I'll think about what to do next." We left the station tired, but with a sense of accomplishment. Harris drove me to his house where we had a shot of whiskey and discussed the previous day. "You know what strikes me most?" I said, looking into the glass. "Not even Christina's cruelty, but the fact that Emma dared to warn me. The child went against her own mother to save her grandfather." "A smart girl," Harris agreed, "and brave. Not every adult would have dared to do such a thing." "What's going to happen to her now, when Christina is arrested?" "She'll stay with her father, and you can help raise her like a grandfather." That prospect made me happy. Emma deserved a better life than what Christina could give her. Maybe this tragic story would be the start of something good for both of us. I went to bed in Harris's guest room, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind was reeling with the events of the day, the faces of the people, Emma's words. "Grandpa, beware. Don't come into the house today." Those simple phrases had saved my life. Outside the window, a new day was beginning to dawn, a day I might not have seen if not for the wisdom and courage of a 7-year-old. The next morning, around 9 o'clock, I received a call from Detective Rodriguez of the North Miami Police Department. His voice was brisk and businesslike. It was obvious that the night's work had paid off. "Mr. Gillens, we have an update on your case. We found the owner of the gas service van." I sat in Harris's kitchen with a cup of coffee, trying to finally wake up after a restless night. The dreams had been disturbing. Dreams of gas pipes, dark figures outside the house, Emma's voice warning of danger. "What did you find out?" I asked, putting it on speakerphone so Harris could hear the conversation too. "The van is listed as city gas service, but it wasn't supposed to be running last night. According to the trip log, the vehicle has been parked at the base since 6 o'clock last night. The shift supervisor claims he didn't send anyone to your address. This meant that someone in the gas department was using a company vehicle for illegal activities. The first thread in the investigation. And who had access to the vehicle? The list is short. We're already interviewing anyone who might have taken the keys. I think we'll have the right person by lunchtime." The detective promised to call as more information came in. In the meantime, he suggested I stay at a friend's house for the time being. The house was still being ventilated and the gas system was being checked for safety. Around noon, Rodriguez checked in again. There was satisfaction in the detective's voice. Clearly, the case was progressing. "Mr. Gillens, we have a suspect in custody. Rick Morales, 38 years old, gas fitter. He was supposed to finish his shift at 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon, but stayed on base until this evening under the pretense of overtime." "And what's he saying?" "Denies everything so far, claims he spent the evening at home with his family, but his wife testified that her husband didn't get home until 10 p.m. and clearly nervous." Harris nodded approvingly. The suspect's alibi was cracking at the seams. An experienced detective would have no trouble finding contradictions in the testimony. "What's next?" "We continue the interrogation. We have your description, license plate numbers, expert testimony about the deliberate damage to the gas system. Sooner or later, he'll confess." The detective wasn't wrong. The call came at 4:30 in the afternoon. "Morales cracked," Rodriguez reported without preamble. "Told the whole scheme. He was bribed by one Christine Gillens, your sister-in-law, I understand." My heart beat faster. At last, there was direct evidence of Christina's guilt. What exactly did he say? "Christina approached him 2 weeks ago through a mutual acquaintance. Offered $5,000 to fix an accidental gas leak. Morales refused at first, but money problems made him agree. And how did they plan to pull it off? Simple and cynical. A small leak in the outside of the system that would create a dangerous concentration of gas in the house overnight. In the morning, the neighbors would discover the body, and the death would be written off as an accident." Harris shook his head grimly. The plan really had been almost perfect, if it hadn't been for Emma's warning. "Has Christina been arrested yet?" "Going to her right now. We want to catch her red-handed before she knows Morales is in custody." The detective asked me to come down to the station for a detainee lineup and additional statements. Harris and I got into his Jeep and headed to the police station. The atmosphere at the station was businesslike. Detectives were preparing for an important arrest, checking documents, coordinating with the prosecutor's office. Morales sat in the holding cell, broken and depressed. When I saw him through the glass, I recognized him immediately. It was the same locksmith we had observed last night. "Yes, that's him," I confirmed to the detective. "The one who worked on my house's gas system." "Great. Now we have a complete picture of the crime." Around 5 p.m., Christina was brought into the station. She had been arrested at home, where she was quietly going about her domestic chores, unaware of the failure of the operation. Emma was at school at that moment, and Daniel was at work. I watched through the glass as the detectives led Christina down the hallway. She looked confused and outraged, loudly demanding explanations, threatening legal action. But in her eyes, she read fear, the fear of a man who realizes his plans have fallen apart. "Mr. Gillens," she turned to me, spotting me in the hallway. "What's going on here? Why have I been arrested?" I stared silently at the woman who had planned my death yesterday. It was amazing how well she was able to feign innocence and bewilderment. If it weren't for Morales' direct testimony, one might have believed her sincerity. "Christina Gillens, you are under arrest on suspicion of attempted murder," the detective pronounced in an official tone. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law." Christina's face went pale. She realized the game was over. About an hour later, Daniel rushed to the station. He had been called in from work and informed of his wife's arrest. My son looked shocked and confused. It was obvious that the news came as a complete surprise to him. "Dad, what's going on?" He pounced on me in the hallway of the station. "They told me Christina was arrested for attempted murder. That's nonsense." "I'm afraid not, son. The police have direct evidence." I briefed him on the events of the last few days, from Emma's warning to the nighttime surveillance and the arrest of the accomplices. Daniel listened with growing horror. "It can't be," he repeated. "Christina isn't capable of such a thing. You're wrong." "Daniel, her accomplice has already told us everything. There are phone records, witness statements, technical evidence." But the son didn't want to believe the obvious. Love and affection blinded him, prevented him from seeing his wife's true colors. "This is a provocation," he exclaimed. "Someone is setting Christina up. She's a loving mother and wife, not a murderer." Daniel demanded to see his wife. The detective authorized a short supervised visit. I watched through the glass as the son tried to comfort Christina, promising to find a good lawyer to prove her innocence. "Danny, honey," Christina said in a trembling voice, "this is all a mistake. I didn't mean to kill anyone. Your father just slipped and hit his head." She was still trying to lie, to come up with alternate versions of events. But the detectives already had Morales' testimony, recordings of their conversations, evidence of the deliberate tampering with the gas system. "Christina, that's enough," Detective Rodriguez said tiredly. "Your accomplice has told you everything. About the $5,000, about the murder plan, about how you studied Mr. Gillen's habits." Christina's face trembled. She realized denial was useless. "Where's Emma?" asked Daniel of the detective. "Who's picking her up from school?" "We've already contacted the school. The girl will be picked up by a social worker until the custody issue is resolved." My heart clenched at the thought of Emma ending up in the wrong hands. She had saved my life, and now she needed help herself. "I want to take my granddaughter in," I told the detective, "temporarily until Daniel gets the situation sorted out." "That's a question for child services," Rodriguez replied, "but I think Grandpa will be considered first." Daniel continued to insist on his wife's innocence, demanding more tests, threatening complaints to higher authorities. He simply couldn't believe that the woman with whom he'd shared a bed and raised a child was planning his father's murder. "Son," I told him gently, "I understand how hard this is for you, but the facts speak for themselves." "What facts?" exploded Daniel. "The testimony of some locksmith who might have falsified Christina for money." He was still grasping at straws, refusing to admit the obvious. Love was making him blind to the truth. The next day I filed the necessary paperwork with child services and took Emma back to my house. The girl spent the night in the foster home, but it was obvious that she was scared and confused. The events of the last few days had turned her child's world upside down. Her mom was arrested, her dad was in despair, her usual life was shattered. When the social worker brought her to my home, Emma clung tightly to my hand and didn't let go for a long time. Her big brown eyes read questions I didn't yet know how to answer. "Grandpa Paul," she said quietly when we were alone, "isn't Mommy coming back again?" I took a seat next to her on the living room couch and put my arm around her shoulders. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that her mother was planning a murder? How to keep at least a modicum of faith in goodness in a child's soul? "Mommy did a very bad thing, little girl. She'll have to answer for it for a long time. Did I do the right thing in warning you?" "Absolutely right. You saved my life, Emma. You're a very brave girl." Emma nodded, but there were still tears in her eyes. The child's psyche was trying to make sense of what was happening, to find logic in an adult world where the closest people could be enemies. The house that could have been my grave not long ago was now filled with children's laughter and voices. Emma timidly explored the space, exploring the rooms, looking at my stamp collection. I showed her the guest bedroom on the second floor, which was now her room. "This is where you'll live until we decide what to do next," I said, helping to organize her few belongings into a closet. "Is Daddy going to live here too?" The question was a painful one. Daniel continued to insist on Christina's innocence, seeking lawyers, preparing appeals. He blamed me for destroying the family, accused me of being biased and cruel to my wife. "For now, Dad lives apart," I replied cautiously, "but he'll be able to visit you." In fact, the relationship with my son had reached a critical point. Yesterday, he came to my house and made a real scandal. "You ruined my family," yelled Daniel, standing in the same living room where Emma was now playing. "Because of your suspicions and paranoia, your wife is in jail and your daughter is motherless. Daniel, your wife planned my murder. The police have direct evidence." "Evidence can be fabricated, and you believe the first person you saw and turned against your own family." My son didn't want to hear reasonable arguments. His love for Christina blinded him, made him deny the obvious facts. He was willing to blame anyone, but admit he'd married a potential murderer. "I'll take Emma," he declared then. "I won't let you poison her brain with your fabrications." "The court has decided otherwise," I replied calmly. "While the investigation is ongoing, the girl stays with me." Daniel slammed the door and left, promising to fight for his daughter to the end. He hadn't called or appeared since, though he had the right to see Emma. The first days of our life together with our granddaughter were spent trying to establish a routine. Emma went to school, I drove her to and picked her up by car. In the evenings, we had dinner together, did homework, watched children's movies. The girl gradually thawed, but at night often cried, missing her father and even her mother. A child's love does not disappear instantly, even when adults do terrible things. "Grandpa," she asked one night at dinner, "why did Mom want to hurt you?" I spent a long time choosing my words, trying to explain complex adult motives in language accessible to a child. Sometimes people want what doesn't belong to them, and they're willing to do bad things to get it. And she wanted your house? Emma was an intelligent child and intuitively understood the conflict. I guess she did. But a house is just a place, and a person's life is far more important than any house. And I wanted that house too. Does that make me a bad person? "No, baby girl," I hastened to reassure her. "It's okay to want something. It's bad to hurt others for the sake of your desires." These conversations helped both of us make sense of what had happened. I watched Emma slowly come to the realization that she had saved not only my life, but also my soul, her own and my father's, who could have been an accessory to the crime. A week later, I made an important decision and made an appointment with a notary. The will made years ago no longer matched reality. Daniel, who had chosen to side with the murderous wife, could not be the sole heir. At the notary's office, I drew up a new document. Emma became the primary beneficiary. The house, the savings, the stamp collection. Daniel would get only a small share, enough to live on, but not luxurious. "Are you sure of your decision?" asked the notary, an elderly man with a gray beard. "Disinheriting your son is a serious step." "I'm not disinheriting him," I replied, "just favoring someone who deserves it." Emma deserved a better future. She showed wisdom and courage that adults lacked. At 7 years old, she proved to be stronger and more honest than her parents. That same evening, I received a call from Christina's lawyer. A young woman with a professionally cold voice offered me to drop the charges in exchange for monetary compensation. "My client is willing to plead guilty to negligence, but not to willful attempted murder," she was saying. "It's possible Mrs. Gillens did hire a locksmith to check the gas system, but without criminal intent." "You have tapes of her conversations with Morales," I replied. "It clearly outlines the plan for the murder." "The tapes can be interpreted in many ways. A jury may find them insufficient evidence." The lawyer tried to sow doubts in me, to get me to compromise, but I was adamant that justice must be done. The next day, Daniel did come to see his daughter. The meeting was tense. He was cold with me, but gentle with Emma. "Mommy will be back soon," he whispered to her, hugging her. "The lawyers will prove it was all a misunderstanding." Emma listened silently, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. The girl had witnessed that conversation, knew the truth better than anyone. "Daddy," she said cautiously, "what if Mommy really wanted to hurt Grandpa?" Daniel's face darkened. "Don't be silly. Mommy loves us all." "But I heard her on the phone." "You didn't understand anything. You're too young to understand adult matters." Daniel raised his voice at his daughter, and I intervened. "Don't yell at the child. Emma is telling the truth." "And you stay out of my relationship with my daughter," my son exploded. "I'm taking her out of here as soon as the legal issues are resolved." He walked away, leaving Emma in tears. The girl didn't understand why her father was angry at her for telling the truth. "Grandfather," she sobbed, "did I do a bad thing to tell Daddy about Mommy's conversation?" "No, sweetie. The truth should always be told, even when it's hard." I hugged my granddaughter and realized that the family would truly never be the same again. Christina had destroyed not only my safety, but my family ties and the trust between loved ones. Daniel made his choice to side with his wife against father and daughter. But Emma and I have a chance to build something new on the rubble of the old. A wise, beyond her years girl who will become not only my granddaughter, but a true friend. and I will give her the love and stability she was deprived of in her parents' family. Looking at Emma, falling asleep with a book in her hands, I thought about how bizarrely fate is formed. A 7-year-old child saved my life and gave me a new meaning of existence. Perhaps this is the real miracle, when good triumphs over evil and truth triumphs over lies.